might kick off at this point. So tonight we're talking about permits and renovations, particularly in the state of Victoria. What the goal tonight is to try and provide a guide to the relevant laws and regulations that apply to building and renovation and permits and insurance and all those sorts of fun things in the state of Victoria. One of the things I'm increasingly conscious of, having spent some time over the last few months thinking about the laws of other states, is that there are some important differences between the laws of the different states. So please don't assume that what I'm telling you tonight is anything other than a prompt to actually get some advice in relation to those other states. Speaking of which, tonight is obviously intended to be a summary only. There's a great deal of detail, and I will sort of give you a very slight entree into that, but I will also be glossing over quite a bit of detail. My intention is to provide you with basically the references to the legislation and other materials if you actually want to go through and look those details up yourself. So as I said, you will have the legislation, we will touch on it, but there is certainly a lot of detail. All I will be doing tonight is giving you a summary, and that is obviously intended to basically create an awareness, but not to replace professional advice. The other thing that I should point out is that I am recording this evening's session. The intention is that that will be made available for people who couldn't attend this evening for one reason or another, or subsequently are interested. I guess the catch is for those that aren't attending tonight, if they do want to watch it on record on an honour basis, I will be asking them to make a donation to the Fred Hollows Foundation. Yeah, if hopefully I can shed some light and some understanding in relation to this topic, perhaps they might be motivated to provide some insight to another person via the Fred Hollows Foundation. But that is not an expectation or a requirement this evening. As I previously indicated, this evening's webinar is entirely free and without obligation. So welcome to those that are here. Today's goal is to give you an awareness of the rules and regulations that surround building, renovating, and the permits and insurances required. The goal is to help you, avoid unnecessary errors. We're starting to see a few cases at the moment where people are getting caught up and trapped at the point where they're trying to sell a property. And if you're trying to fix these problems after the event, it's generally both expensive and time consuming. So hopefully we can avoid that if you have this up front. Second of all, there are things you can do that will actually minimize your costs of complying with various legislation. We'll come back to that in more detail, but if you are aware of what the issues are, you can sometimes structure the way you do things to try and minimize the costs that you incur and the other sort of compliance requirements that you might have. Finally, if we can give you a better understanding, hopefully it means that your projects proceed more smoothly and without unnecessary delays. And if you can do that, that could mean you make more money, which is really the goal of tonight. If we can help you avoid problem and basically get your projects completed more efficiently and faster, you should make more money out of them, and that's the goal. This is, I guess, part of a series of presentations in a way, or a commitment that I have to what I call preventative law. That's the idea of trying to put advice in the hands of clients before they need it, because if you have it in advance, then you can actually plan, you can adapt, and you can be prepared, all of which helps. So there is an online course that I have, which is the Interactive Guide to Property Development Contracts. Things that basically, knowledge and lessons I've accumulated over 20 years of advising property developers. And again, the goal is to maximize profits, accelerate your projects, and minimize problems. We'll touch on that again at the end. So why exactly are we exploring permits and insurances? Well, as we said before, we can save time with better planning, avoid unnecessary stress. I've got a few people who can vouch for the fact that when you have a contracted sale and your purchaser comes back and starts complaining about lack of permits or insurances, that can be quite stressful. Also, as I said, if you can plan ahead, you can better structure your projects and minimize compliance costs. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name's Lewis O'Brien, by the way. I spent a very long time at university. On top of that, I've been advising property developers as clients for a very long time. Pleasingly, a number of those have gone on to become quite successful property developers, which is, it's always nice to think that I had some small help in all of that. And in addition, I do have to admit that I have bought and sold properties on my own. And in fact, one of the stories I will tell you tonight is an example of me proving the old adage that a lawyer who acts for himself has a fool for a client, but more about that later. As I said before, I am committed to the idea of preventative law, which is the idea of trying to provide advice or legal advice and an opportunity to avoid unnecessary mistakes before you get there. We have a YouTube channel, Lewis O'Brien's 5-Minute Guides, and there's a number of very popular videos there that one of which is in fact a shortened form of this presentation, which talk about a bunch of things that most developers, I don't think, when they start out, are aware of or do well enough. So it's an opportunity to try and point people in the right direction before they get too far. We do have a newsletter that goes out every month or so, which is entirely free, and you can sign up at lewisobrien.com.au. And we also run seminars and webinars like this one, and also in other forums from time to time. So let's get on with it. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is domestic building work. And particularly, let's look at what the definition of domestic building work is. And for that, we need to go to section 5 of the, sorry, just bear with me, I'm trying to, just bear with me a second. I need to find my way to the relevant section of the Act. So, this is section 5 of the Domestic Building Contracts Act. And basically this is the definition of domestic building work. And a lot of what we're going to talk about this evening follows from or is built on this definition. And if you look through it quickly, basically erection or construction of a home is one. Renovation, alteration, extension, improvement or repair of a home. There's a bit more there, talking about landscaping and a bunch of other things, but the essential point here is that that work that relates to the renovation, alteration, extension, improvement or repair of a home is domestic building work. However, there are a number of exclusions. Sorry, I'm just flicking between screens. So there are a number of exclusions which can become quite important. So our definition of domestic building work basically included all this renovation type work, but some things are excluded from it. And particularly, this is domestic building work to which the Act doesn't apply. And it's specific types of work that are basically carried out under a contract for one type of work only, which is to say, adopting the electrical work item here, that if I employ an electrician to do electrical work only in my house that I'm renovating, strictly speaking, that is not domestic building work. Now, that might seem a little bit pointless, but it does become important, so bear with me on that. So equally, if I've got people doing glazing, so installing windows, people putting floor coverings on, insulating, painting, plastering, plumbing, tiling, chain wire fence, to put in a tennis court, don't know why we'd include that, but it's there. Or if I decide I need a mast pole antenna, aerial or similar structure, none of that, if I give it to one contractor under a single contract for only that type of work, that is all not domestic building work. As I said, that might seem a little bit airy-fairy, but please bear with me on that. So, and again, just bear with me because we're flicking between screens again. So that is a definition of domestic building work. Why does that become important? Well, when we get to the requirements around a domestic building contract, so if we go to the Domestic Building Contracts Act, If the value of work exceeds $10,000, which is the current stipulated amount, then the requirements of the Domestic Building Contracts Act apply, which means that there is a required format for our contract with a bunch of disclaimers and warnings. The person doing the work has to be a registered builder. There are limits on the deposit that can be taken and when it can be taken. There is a requirement for that builder to be insured and to provide builder's warranty insurance, a requirement for a cooling off period, a number of other things. So what this means is that if we are engaging someone to do work on our property and the value of that contract exceeds $10,000, then we need to be thinking about whether a domestic building contract is required. Now, this point, like a number of the points that I'm going to cover, is actually not particularly well known. I had the argument in VCAT a couple of weeks ago with one of the members in VCAT on exactly this point, saying, you know, I had, in the context of trying to sell a property that I own, engaged a handyman to do some work tidying up the property before it was put on the market, and the contract value of that was about $12,500. Anyway, the work wasn't done well, and we ended up in VCAT disputing it. And a particular point there was that my claim was that because it was domestic building work, there should have been a contract, there should have been a number of things. And basically, because of all of that, the handyman's claim should be dismissed. The member that was hearing it basically poo-pooed that and said, well, it's clearly just, you know, tidying up and landscaping and stuff. It's not domestic building work. I'm throwing, you know, that's ridiculous. Anyway, she obviously got some further advice because she very quickly came back and decided, in fact, it all was domestic building work. And because there was no domestic, you know, because it was more than $10,000, the Act applied and a bunch of other things. I guess my point is that some of these points are not well understood even within the legal profession. So we're going to take this down to a level of detail and make sure you've got an understanding. So if I am renovating, if I am signing a contract for someone for more than $10,000 of domestic building work, then I need to be thinking about whether I need a domestic building contract, whether I need a registered builder, whether I need all those other formalities around compliance. Now, I guess there's a couple of points to note there. One is that if it was, for example, a contract with an electrician to do $15,000 worth of electrical house, so to rewire the house or something, because that is a single type of work under a single contract, that would not fall within the definition of domestic building work, and therefore these requirements wouldn't apply. On the other hand, if I paid somebody to basically project manage and to organize $15,000 worth of building work and some painting and a few other things, then clearly that would exceed $10,000. And because that contract relates to multiple different types of building work, then I'm going to fall within the requirements of the Domestic Building Contracts Act. And as I said, then we've got the formalities. We need a particular form of contract. We need insurance. We need deposits, warnings, cooling off periods, all that sort of fun stuff. So this is not particularly a moot point. Now, see if we can. So I'm just trying to work back to so just make sure that you can see the same screen I've got. And this is just emphasizing the point that Domestic Building Contracts Act, again, Section 29, you're not supposed to enter into a major domestic building contract, and that's one for $10,000 of work to carry out domestic building work for another person unless they're a registered builder and they're authorized to do it, which is essentially the point that we've just made. It's basically putting it on the person who is doing the work, providing the service, that they cannot enter into a contract for more than $10,000. So let's go back to the slides. And I apologize, there is a bit of flicking around here. So I think we've covered those points. So let's then talk about building permits. When do you actually need a building permit? Now, it actually surprised me to find that the Act, and it's Section 16 of the Building Act, which we'll come to in a minute, actually requires that all building work in Victoria requires a permit. And I will add in brackets for the minute, unless an exemption applies. So bear with me, and we will go to that section of the Act next. Okay, so this is section 16 of the Building Act. So a person must not carry out building work unless a building permit in relation to the work has been issued and is enforced. And that would apply equally to a registered builder and also a homeowner doing their own work. Now, I guess the positive thing is, moving along, again, I'm flicking screens. The positive thing is that there are exemptions from building permits. So a building permit's not required for the work specified in column 2 of the table in schedule 3, which we will find our way to in a moment. So it's column 2 of schedule 3. So here is a list out of the Act of the building work that doesn't require a building permit and an occupancy permit. And let's see. So we won't worry about that. Sorry, I should have found the exact provision. So things that don't exceed 40 square meters, perhaps. Here we go. So repair, renewal, or maintenance of a part of an existing building if the building work will not adversely affect structural soundness, won't increase the floor area, or affect the underpinning or replacement of footings, etc., etc. So basically, most common cosmetic renovations fall within this exemption, which means you don't need a building permit. Sorry, so that's the good news. The sort of and I think logically that makes sense, and that's the regulation schedule we've just looked at. So most common sort of cosmetic renovations don't require building permits. And as I said, I think that conceptually that makes some sense and sort of accords with what I think most people understand, but it's always good to see it in writing, of course. And this is where it does start to depart a little bit from what I think people are aware of or understand. Let's start to talk about the requirements around owner builders. The first point is that if you're going to do more than $16,000 worth of domestic building work, you need an owner builder certificate of consent from the Victorian Building Authority. So, again, I'm flicking screens. Where am I going? Okay, let's go there. Oh. So this is the relevant prohibition, Section 25B of the Building Act. An owner of land must not carry out domestic building work in respect to the building if the cost of the work is more than the prescribed amount. The prescribed amount is $16,000. So unless you've got a certificate of consent, and that's a certificate of consent from the Victorian Building Authority. And there is a bunch of material on the Victorian Building Authority website that talks about these owner builder certificate of consent. Now, and you know, basically there's a little course and there's a bunch of other requirements that you need to comply with. But I'll leave you to read that information. But if we come back to, sorry, and I'm flicking between screens quite a bit. So if we come back to this idea here, so the Victorian Building Authority says that if you're doing more than $16,000 domestic building work, you need one of these certificates of consent. This is where the definition of domestic building work becomes important. Because, for example, if I'm going to do a $40,000 renovation and I employ a friend to project manage that for me and agree that I've got a contract with them to do $40,000 worth of work and they're going to sublet all that work to various trades and whatever else, then we've got a problem. Because now I've clearly exceeded the 16,000. Bear in mind that my contract is for multiple types of work, and so I'm clearly falling above the $16,000 domestic building work. On the other hand, if I was a little bit smarter about this, I would probably find a way to carve out the electrical work, the plumbing work, the flooring work, and some of the other things, so that what was left was less than $16,000 worth. And I've certainly seen recently renovations where the client has done north of $50,000 worth of renovations, but because of this definition, we can actually get them below $16,000 worth of domestic building work. And that is a function of a couple of things. One is it means that the client has actually kept the records and has a schedule and a spreadsheet, which is good, so that we can actually prove it if we need to. And then secondly, it means that they've been fairly careful about the way they've let the work. As I said, if I give one $10,000 contract to a plumber and one $10,000 contract to an electrician, I'm all good on this definition. If I give them both of those pieces of work to the same person, I'm in trouble and I now need a certificate of consent. And that's, look, it's not impossible to get one, but it's a whole lot of compliance and bureaucracy that I could have avoided if I was a little cleverer about things. The other thing about owner builders is when you go to sell the property, assuming that you've done it within about 7 years, you need an owner builder inspection report. And basically what that means is I get a specialist builder in who provides a report in the required format as to basically any defects in the work, etc., any used materials, all that sort of stuff, any incomplete work that has to be included in my Section 32 statement when I sell. And if I've done more than $16,000 worth of domestic building work, I also need owner builder warranty insurance. And again, this is an area where understanding the definition of domestic building work means that if I'm careful about it, I can probably get away without this insurance. So there's a cost saving and an administration saving in terms of organizing it. So yeah, be aware that if you are doing work as an owner builder, you need an inspection report, and there's no particular threshold on that I can find. So technically, I guess if you paint the place, you need an inspection report that goes with your Section 32 statement. Practically, if all you've done is paint, I don't think anyone's going to worry too much. But you know, technically, those are the rules. On the other hand, if I'm spending larger amounts of money, so north of 16,000, then you know there's probably an insurance requirements as well, depending how I'm structured. The other thing that's worth touching on, again, I'll share the screen, is the idea that there are warranties in the standard contract of sale. So what we're looking at here is an extract of the new format Law Institute REOV contract of sale, and particularly general condition 6.6. So this is a standard general condition that goes into these, basically almost every contract in Victoria at the moment. And what it's worth understanding, or what's worth understanding, that as vendor, if you have carried out domestic building work, then you are warranting to the purchaser that has been carried out in a proper and workmanlike manner. I might just get my texture out. So it's been done in a proper and workmanlike manner, that all the materials were good and suitable, and that unless I've disclosed, they were all new. And it's also been carried out in accordance with all laws and legal requirements. Now, personally, I find that a little bit scary because, as you're probably discovering tonight, the extent of the laws and legal requirements is almost infinite. And I think personally it's almost impossible to comply down to the last letter. But here you are warranting to the purchaser that you have actually done all of these things. So again, just worth being aware of that, because I think most people, when they renovate and sell, they're not aware that they are providing these warranties, and importantly, these warranties will continue after settlement. So it's not going to be the case, I don't think, where you can simply say that, you know, as the contracts generally do, that you, Mr. Purchaser, are buying the property as is, where is, and it's all your problem. You know, in this case, I think it's, you know, there's an onus on you and a liability beyond settlement to make sure that these warranties are complied with. So that is, you know, that is owner builders and why we need to pay a little bit of attention to this. The other reason for raising this is that we have seen a lot of purchaser solicitors and conveyancers raise these sorts of issues. And I was a little bit curious as to why, until I myself did an educational session with our professional indemnity insurer, who basically suggested and recommended that as when you're acting for a purchaser, that all legal professionals should essentially Google the property looking for before and after photos. And of course, the internet being what it is, those sorts of photos are immediately available in glorious detail. So you can then see, particularly if this property was sold recently and has been sold again shortly after, you get a pretty good idea how much work was done. And look, obviously, as a legal professional, I can't estimate how much work's been done, but I can certainly tell the difference between a $5,000 renovation and a $50,000 renovation. And we've had a number of clients recently who've been asked how much their renovation cost and to provide owner-builder inspection reports, owner-builder warranty insurance, and all that sort of stuff. Now, fortunately, in most of those cases, we've been able to get the client to a point where we can say that really the domestic building work within the definition that we've talked about was below $16,000, and hence we didn't have too much of a problem. However, there are other cases where I'm aware of clients who basically let out, paid someone who's more in the nature of a handyman type project manager person to do more than $16,000 worth of work, and those people I suspect are going to have a bit of a problem with their compliance. The next thing, and probably the final element of this that I wanted to touch on, was the requirement for builder's warranty insurance. So basically, and let's go back to, sorry, flicking between screens again. Oh, okay. Sorry, I might just go back briefly and just touch on this requirement in the Building Act, which actually makes an offence for an owner builder to sell the building without a report or insurance. So it is actually a breach of the Building Act to sell a renovated property without your building inspection report, or without your owner builder inspection report, or without your owner builder warranty insurance. The other thing I'll just touch on quickly for those that are interested is there is a positive legal obligation in Section 32 or 32B of the Sale of Land Act to actually include this information in your vendor's statement. So, yeah, there is a legal obligation to disclose this information when you sell. And then so yes, that was that. Sorry, and going back to the slides, builder's warranty insurance. Oops, where are we? Basically, where a registered builder does more than $16,000 worth of domestic building work, they are required to give you evidence of builder's warranty insurance. In fact, and it's worth understanding that the builder is not entitled to start work, and in fact not entitled to ask for a deposit or any other money until they've actually provided you evidence that there is insurance in place. And before they claim their final payment, they should provide you a certificate of builder's warranty insurance. And again, as we've just seen in Section 32B of the Sale of Land Act, you actually need that insurance because you're required to disclose it when you sell the property. So that is, I guess, a quick summary of the relevant provisions. This is sort of an example of the sort of material we cover in the Property Development Contracts course. It is a self-paced online course. Basically, it's my attempt to provide and summarise the advice and services that successful property developers rely on at a more affordable price. There is basically 12 separate weekly sort of topics that we cover, which is basically all the major contracts that you as a property developer, or even a serious renovator, are required essentially to sign or deal with. Now, my experience, unfortunately, is in most of these cases, property developers are on the receiving end in the sense that someone else gives them a contract and expects them to sign it. This is basically advice about what you need to understand about those contracts, where they go wrong, and what as a developer you need to know about them and change about them to try and get the right sort of results. So each week, module includes notes and commentary, so video commentary. There are sample documents to look at. I think it's helpful to see what you're going to sign and have a chance to think about it before you sign it. There's also examples of good and bad documents as well, a key issues checklist for each topic, and we're also running 1 hour group Zoom sessions on Tuesday nights, just to allow people a chance to discuss and ask questions and try and expand on their understanding of the material. But I won't harp on that. I will sort of leave the formal part of this there in the hope that there are some questions out there or some further case studies. If not, there are certainly other sort of experiences I can talk to. I might stop that. So if there's any questions out there, now is your big chance. So as I said, certainly had a number of experiences with clients lately, and including myself, I should admit, where my dodgy handyman claimed $12,000 for a whole bunch of crappy work. And because he was combining multiple services in his contract, he fell above the $10,000 limit on domestic building work. Therefore, he was required to have a domestic building contract, which he didn't have. He's not a registered builder. He took too much in the deposit, didn't provide insurance. And more to the point, when he had a crack at me in VCAT, he found out that he wasn't allowed to go directly to VCAT. He had to go to the Building Resolution Disputes Board first, which he hadn't done. And I pointed all of that out to VCAT, who weren't terribly happy with me, but ultimately conceded that I was right. And that, in fact, may be why I didn't get a Christmas card from them this year. Who knows? Anyway, were there any other questions out there?
Hi, Louis. This is Morgan here.
How are you?
Yeah, thanks for the one. Good, and thanks for the wonderful presentation. Just on the requirements of sale for the inspection report. So we would need a certified building practitioner to provide the inspection report?
I mean, there's a specific format for it, and what you find I mean, I think, yes, it needs to be a building practitioner, but I think you find that there are a number of builders who specialize in providing those sorts of reports. They tend not to be terribly expensive. Generally, it's, you know, sort of 3 or 4 page format, not unlike your classic, you know, building, you know, pre-purchase building inspection report. So it's not hugely onerous to do that. But yeah, it's always better to be pre-prepared and have that organized up front rather than be scrambling at the end trying to put it in place later.
Yeah, thanks, Louis.
Any other questions out there?
Hey, Lewis.
Hey, Felicity, how are you?
I'm good. So my question is, so if you're the person who's coordinating the work on behalf of the vendor, so essentially the project manager, you basically should structure it so that the vendor pays all the various trades in the way you suggested to keep them under the individual 10,000 limits. So you, as then the person coordinating all that, would you then charge some sort of consulting fee? You wouldn't charge any sort of building works type fee then, is that?
Look, I mean, I think that's right from a couple of perspectives. The first is that you want to try and make sure that your client is not going to be doing more than $16,000 worth of domestic building work. So if you can organise your contracts with the electrician, for example, directly between the client and the electrician, ditto the plumbing, the flooring, and a bunch of other things, then yeah, that's going to ease their compliance burden. The other point from your perspective as the person who's organising it is you want to make sure that you're not managing more than $10,000, or you're not billing basically for more than $10,000 worth of building work either, bearing in mind that some of the recent changes suggest that project management is effectively a form of building work. So
Yes.
You know, if you were to render a bill for say $15,000 for project management fees, you might find that you're required to have a domestic building contract to be a registered builder and do all those other fun things as well. So you might want to try and find a way to structure your fees such that you're getting paid less than $10,000, even if that's maybe there's some sort of other arrangement in the background where you get a profit share some other way.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? All silent and done? I mean, I think my record now for getting building work under $16,000, I think we got $62,000 worth of building work under the limit. And again, that was about breaking the work down into spreadsheet by different types and then looking at what we could reasonably exclude from the definition of domestic building work. And in fact, we got $62,000 worth of work, quite a few $1,000s under the $16,000 threshold, which then made life a bit easier. The other thing is that a lot of the, you know, I said before that a lot of people are, a lot of legal professionals are looking at the internet to work out whether building work's done or not. A lot of them don't understand the detail of the definitions that I've just shared with you, and are a little bit sort of gobsmacked when we start saying, well, you know, it's actually less than $16,000 worth of domestic building work as defined. And there's an inevitable exchange of emails pointing out different regulations and what's excluded. And certainly from a client perspective, I think that process is a lot easier if you've actually kept a reasonable record and been mindful about how you've allocated the work.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anyone else had a similar sort of experience where they've had a problem with a contract of sale?
I feel sorry for you staring at a wall of black. I'll stay here and shake my head.
Thank you, Felicity. But look, genuinely, if that's answered people's questions, and if there aren't any further questions, I will plug and leave you to your evening and whatever Christmas festivities and drinks may beckon.
It was extremely illuminating. Thank you, Lewis. You've cleared up a question I've had for months, so perfect.
Excellent. That's the goal. And as I said, I will post a recording of this session on YouTube somewhere. If people are interested in following that up afterwards, please let me know. As I said, for those who come back later, there will be a donation to the Fred Hollows Foundation on an honour basis. I'm not going to administer it. But otherwise, I hope this does sort of clarify what the rules and regulations are and help you simplify your next project. And at that, I will wish you all good evening.
Yeah,
Thanks, Lewis.
thank you, Louis. Bye.
Good night.
Thanks, Lewis.